Hello, class. So this week we're going to be getting into experimental design. And I want to take a minute to just run through experimental design with you, give you some of the basics, because this chapter of your book is going to give you a lot of information, lots of terms in there to go through. I want to cover off on some of the basics, and then as you go through and read through the chapter, make sure you do so, by the way. If you have questions, feel free to reach out and we can chat through them, okay? So in experimental design, what's the purpose of experimental design? Why are we even doing it? Well, what we're trying to do is we're trying to establish causality. Okay, we're trying to show that one variable actually causes another. Now, your book will talk about this a bit, but we can't do that indefinitely. Okay, I mean, all we can do our best is trying to infer that actually one variable causes another. Because there's a lot of other things that could be happening, a lot of other variables at play, combinations of variables for that matter, that could be creating the causation that we're seeing. So, in science, when we're doing these experiments and experimental design, we're trying to infer causality. Remember that. We can never determine that 100%. Okay, but again, we do these experiments for that purpose. So we have an example here. We have two variables. One is happiness, the other is friendliness. Imagine that we have a hypothesis that says, well, we think friendliness, the extent to which people are friendly to each other, is really driven by how happy these individuals are. Okay, so that if we can increase happiness, we can then cause more friendliness amongst different individuals. Now, what you'll notice is right now, the way we're talking about these variables, it's very theoretical, right? They're concepts. They're not tangible things at this point. And that's called the theoretical level. Okay, so we're working with these variables on the theoretical level. But as we create an experiment, that's where we start. Okay, we start with our theory and these concepts and variables at a theoretical level. And then we have to bring them down and actually do something called operationalize. We need to operationalize these variables to the operational level to actually create something more tangible, okay? How are we going to manipulate or deal with these variables? Well, for variable one, happiness, maybe what we're going to do is we're going to give people a number of compliments, okay? And we're saying that as people get more compliments, that makes them more happy. So that's the way we're operationalizing the variable of happiness. We're going to be giving them compliments, all right? Now, the second variable of friendliness, maybe we're going to do that. We're going to operationalize that by looking to see how they treat new classmates, all right? And if they treat them in a positive manner, then we consider that being more friendly. We can talk a little bit more about that. But the whole key here is, again, I want you to notice the difference between the theoretical level and the operational level, right? Again, theoretical, that you're dealing with concepts. They're not tangible, okay? But then we bring them down to something that is more tangible. It's called the operational level, right? Now, what's going to be important here is once we get into the first variable of happiness, there might be different cells that we put in this experiment, okay? Where one group gets 10 compliments, another group of people get 5 compliments, and a third group gets 0 or no compliments, okay? That's called our control group. Now, the control group, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with this term, these are the folks that will be getting none of the treatment, all right, or none of the independent variable. Now, this is really important because the control group and experimental design, that's really what defines experimental design. That's what really makes it different from other types of research. It's the idea that we're manipulating a variable, okay? Remember that because that's key, this idea of manipulating variables. That is the key difference between experimental designs versus other designs. So in our example here, what we'd be doing is we'd be manipulating happiness to understand its impact on friendliness, okay? Now, the variable that we're manipulating, what is that called? That's called the independent variable. I'm sure it's not a new term for people, but just wanted to call that out, right? So happiness would be our independent variable in this example because that would be the variable that we are manipulating. Now, the dependent variable, that's going to be friendliness. That's going to be the variable that we are measuring, okay? We're trying to see the impact of happiness on friendliness, okay? And the variable that the impact is being measured on, that is your dependent variable, okay? Okay, so then how are we manipulating our independent variable? Well, again, we have these 3 cells, right? Again, one cell, somebody's getting more compliments, 10 of them. Another cell, 5 compliments. Third cell, 0 compliments. So that's the manipulation of the variable of happiness as we are attempting to operationalize it. Now, one of the obvious things here that I'm sure you're probably thinking is, well, hold on. If we give people different amounts of compliments, does that really have an impact on their happiness? Right? Or actually, if we look at the way they treat a new classmate, is that really about how friendly they are? Okay? Well, fair push, okay? And that's part of what we call construct validity. I'll throw these on the screen here. The last term, construct validity, is really about, hey, are we measuring and manipulating the things that we think we are? okay? And there's work to be done around that. So if we give people different amounts of compliments, are we really measuring happiness, or are we manipulating something else? Okay. So internal validity, it's another term to know. Where the key thing here is, hey, are we actually causing the impact on the dependent variable that we think we are with the independent variable, okay? Is it really the independent variable that's causing the change in the dependent variable, all right? Versus some other factor, some other variable. And that's what we mean when we say something has good internal validity. It means that, yes, actually, it is the case that the manipulation of the independent variable is causing the impact in the dependent variable. In our example, let's take a look at it. Imagine that, again, we're giving people these different amounts of compliments. But imagine also that, people who are in a 10 compliments condition, they're actually in a different facility, a nicer facility. Maybe they're getting, peanuts and pretzels and soda and things like that while they're waiting, okay? Then how much faith do we have that it really is the compliments that's driving the friendliness? Maybe it's just the case they're in a nicer facility with better treatment, right? And that's actually driving the friendliness. So one of the things that we need to be really careful about is this idea of internal validity. And one of the things we do for that is we try and control as many other variables as we can, all right? So again, we'd be in the same location with the same kind of script when we introduce ourselves and tell people what's going on. You want to hold all these things constant so we can have more confidence that it is indeed the independent variable that we're manipulating that's causing the change, all right? External validity. This is the idea that the results that we get, right, the causation that we find, it can actually be generalized well beyond this study. So again, back to our example, imagine that, the people that we bring into the study are college-age women from, let's say, 18 to 20 years old in a certain region of the country between certain hours, between, different dates in March, okay? Well, how confident are we that this idea of happiness leading to friendliness will actually work beyond just that small sample, okay? That's pretty narrow. You're talking about a very specific group of people in a specific area at a specific point in time. What we want to do is probably replicate this with different types of people, different locations, maybe different countries, to understand if happiness really is having an impact on friendliness. But again, the piece to keep in mind is, hey, are we actually operationalizing these variables the right way? Think about it this way. At the theoretical level, the variable like happiness, right, there's a lot of ways that could come to life that all tie back to happiness. So at the theoretical level, you have happiness, but when you operationalize it, you can operationalize it in a lot of different ways, right? I mean, maybe we give people compliments. Maybe we give them ice cream. Maybe we have them help somebody else. There's a lot of different ways you can do things or operationalize to get to happiness. So we got to be mindful of that and try and find a way that we think is really tapping into happiness versus some other variable. Because if you have another variable that we think is causing the difference, that's called a confound. Okay, some third or multitude of other variables that we think is driving the difference. So again, we try and keep everything else the same or static, controlling for those other variables. There's one more point I want to bring up with you guys, which is randomization that your book will talk about, or random assignment to a condition. This is really, really important because one of the things that we'll do is, like, as we bring in people for the experiment, we will randomly assign them to condition, okay? So imagine we have, 200 people coming in, all right? Now we're going to take those 200 people, and you could say, hey, the first 30 people are going to cell A, next 30 people are going to cell B, and the remainder in cell C. The only problem with that is that actually you want to be able to randomize them, because imagine the first 30 people on their way in that day, maybe there's a traffic accident in the neighborhood and it made for tough driving conditions. So basically all those people that you get in for that day are going into one particular cell. And the impact of that, those conditions for those people may play a role in the results that you see, okay? But if we randomly assign people to these different cells, then it should cancel out any effect of that, okay? So randomization or random assignment, what we're really trying to do here is we're trying to make sure that that we're canceling out all these other variables, because we can't control for all of them, right? I mean, maybe some people woke up on the wrong side of the bed, had a bad day, significant other broke up with them, they lost their job, got into a fight with their parents, who knows what, right? We can't control for all those variables. But if we randomly assign them to different conditions, the thinking is that actually those random effects will cancel each other out across condition, okay? So when you're doing an experimental design, it's very, very important to randomly assign people to condition. And you'll see that as you go through the text, okay? All right, so just a quick overview. Wanted to make sure you guys are familiar with some of those terms and some of the thinking here in experimental design. Read through your book thoroughly, and if you have any questions, please reach out. All right, thanks.